While passing through a parking lot, Ibrahim Traore noticed a mother sitting in her car, looking distressed. Her baby was crying uncontrollably. What Ibrahim did next was not only unexpected, it would change lives forever. This is a touching and inspiring story that shows how one small act of kindness can transform someone's world. It is a tale filled with humanity, generosity, and hope. It was a dusty Wednesday evening in Ouagadougou. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the streets. President Ibrahim Traoré, who was known for visiting local areas without any notice, had just left a community meeting. His convoy decided to take a different route through a quiet, rundown neighborhood near the edge of the city. That's when he heard a faint but clear sound, a baby's cry. The sound came from an old parking lot near a closed supermarket. Ibrahim immediately raised his hand to signal the driver to stop. He turned to the security officer next to him and asked if he had heard it too. Both of them stepped out of the vehicle, drawn toward the sound. Between two abandoned vans, they spotted a small blue car with its window partly open. Inside, a woman sat with swollen eyes and tear-streaked cheeks, holding a crying baby wrapped in a faded pink towel. As they approached, she looked up, clearly frightened, in a trembling voice. She quietly begged, "I'm sorry. Please, I'll leave." Ibrahim said nothing at first. He stood silent, not out of pity or disgust, but because he felt a deep, painful ache in his heart. He had seen suffering before, but this felt different. In that instant, something within him changed. Then, with a gentle tone, he assured her, "I'm not here to chase you away. What's your name?" The woman hesitated, her lips shaking, and finally whispered, "Mariam." The baby's cries began to soften as she rocked him gently. Ibrahim crouched beside the car and asked what had happened. His guard watched from a distance, unsure of how to help. Mariam took a deep breath, looking down at the steering wheel, and shared her story. She said she had a job before, but her husband had died in an accident 6 months ago. Since then, she couldn't pay the rent, and the landlord had evicted her just last week. She had been living in the car with her baby, Issa, ever since. Ibrahim blinked, trying hard to hide his emotion, when he gently asked if she had any family who could help. Mariam shook her head and said there was no one, just her and Issa. Looking around, Ibrahim took in the cold darkness, the smell of oil, and the hard pavement where they had been sleeping. It felt like a prison with no walls. Without another word, Ibrahim stood up, pulled out his phone, and made a call. He ordered a room to be prepared immediately, with a warm bed, food, and medical help. Mariam looked at him, confused and amazed, and asked who he was. Ibrahim simply smiled and said, "Just a man who believes you deserve more than this." About half an hour later, Mariam found herself barefoot in the lobby of a simple but clean hotel. She looked around, still in disbelief. The receptionist handed her a key with a warm smile. Ibrahim led her gently toward her room to 106. When the door opened, she smelled fresh sheets and warm air. She gasped at the sight. There was a crib, diapers, bottled milk, a basket of food, and clean clothes. Mariam tried to refuse, saying she couldn't accept such kindness. But Ibrahim calmly replied that she already had, and that her baby deserved peace at night. When she placed Issa in the crib, he giggled, a sound she hadn't heard in days. Ibrahim promised that a doctor would visit in the morning, but for now, he urged her to rest. Mariam sat on the bed, still trying to take it all in. She looked at Ibrahim, this kind stranger who felt like a miracle, and whispered her thanks. He nodded and quietly left the room, but outside the door, he paused, placing his hand on his chest, his breath shaky. He knew this wasn't just an act of charity. For him, it had become personal. It was the start of something greater. That night, Mariam found it hard to sleep. It wasn't because she was uncomfortable after so many nights in the car. She finally felt warm and safe, but her mind wouldn't let her rest. As she watched baby Issa asleep peacefully in the crib, her thoughts drifted back to the past. She gazed out of the window and remembered Abdul, her husband. He had been a humble and honest motorcycle taxi driver. Together, they had dreamed of a small house, a tiny shop, and maybe 2 children. But all of those dreams had vanished on a rainy night when a speeding truck hit Abdul. He hadn't survived the accident. At the time, she was 5 months pregnant, with no job, no income, and no support. Life had turned into a slow, endless nightmare. The world kept moving, but she felt stuck in her sorrow. Suddenly, there was a soft knock at the door. It was Kader, Ibrahim's assistant. president. He handed her a small envelope, saying that President Ibrahim wanted her to have it. Inside, she found documents, temporary ID papers, medical vouchers, and a bank card that already had some money on it. Miriam looked at him, stunned, and whispered, "Why?" Kader smiled gently and said it was because someone believed she was worth saving. In that moment, a small spark of hope, buried deep within her for so long, began to flicker again. But she knew this was just the beginning of her journey and of Ibrahim's. Meanwhile, back at the presidential residence, Ibrahim sat alone in his study. His advisors had already told him not to get involved. They thought it was too emotional, not something a president should do. But Ibrahim couldn't forget the look in Miriam's eyes or the sound of Issa's cry. He picked up his pen and wrote in his journal, asking himself what leadership meant if not protecting the most forgotten. The next morning, Ibrahim returned to the hotel. This time, he came with breakfast bread, eggs, and hot milk. Miriam was surprised to see him at the door. He smiled and said he hoped she didn't mind, explaining that he wanted to check on her himself. Overwhelmed, Miriam asked why he was helping her. He paused for a moment before sharing that he had lost his mother when he was young, and she had suffered far more than she deserved. He told Miriam that he couldn't help his mother back then, but he could help her now. Her lips quivered. She wanted to cry but was too stunned. Ibrahim sat down and looked into her eyes, promising calm, "I promise you, Miriam, by the end of this week, your life will be different." She didn't know what he meant exactly, but somehow she believed him. Later that day, a black SUV arrived to take Miriam and Issa to a trusted local clinic that Ibrahim had arranged. At the clinic, Dr. Sif, a kind and soft-spoken pediatrician, examined Issa carefully. The doctor explained that the baby was malnourished, but assured Miriam that it was something that could fix. Issa was a fighter. Miriam listened quietly, her heart racing, as no one had shown her this much care in a long time. Then came her turn for the checkup. She had been ignoring her headaches, back pain, and constant fatigue, thinking it was normal, but it wasn't. The doctor gently told her that she had an infection. It wasn't serious yet, but he explained that if they hadn't caught it now, it could have become dangerous. Miriam felt her chest tighten. She realized how close she had been to silently dying in the cold car, right next to her baby. When she stepped out of the clinic, the sun seemed brighter than she remembered. Ibrahim was waiting outside, leaning against the SUV with a warm smile. He told her that the doctor said she was going to be okay. She nodded slowly and whispered, "You saved." But Ibrahim shook his head and said, "No, you saved yourself. I just opened the door." By the fourth day, word had quietly started to spread. People spoke in hushed tones about the woman, the baby, and the president. The details weren't clear. Some thought it was a publicity stunt, while others believed it was part of a secret project. But none of that mattered to Miriam. In her quiet hotel room, she stood at the window while Issa played nearby. For the first time, she let herself imagine a better future. She wondered what it would be like to have a job again, and what it would mean for Issa to grow up in a real home. Then, another knock at the door. It was Ibrahim once more. He handed her a small gift bag, saying simply that it was for her. Inside, she found a notebook, a pen, and a handwritten note from him. The note inside the gift bag read, "Write your future. Start today." Miriam clutched the notebook as if it were a treasure. She sat on the edge of the bed, stared at the empty page, and began to write. She wrote, "Day 4. I am still afraid, but I am no longer alone." In that quiet hotel room, with only her heartbeat and the paper before her, Miriam began to rewrite her story. Outside, Ibrahim was already preparing the next step. That same afternoon, Ibrahim set out on a short trip. This time, he went alone, without his usual convoy. His destination was an old, forgotten building on the southern edge of the city, a shelter that had once served displaced women but had long been abandoned. Now, it stood silent, dusty, and broken. Ibrahim stepped through the creaking doors, his face calm but full of determination. He told the caretakers to reopen it and ordered that every pipe be fixed and every wall painted within 48 hours. The caretakers stared at him in shock, pointing out that the building hadn't been used in years. But Ibrahim simply said it was time to use it again, this time for good. Meanwhile, at the hotel, Miriam received a call from Kader. He told her the president wanted to show her something the next day and asked her to be ready. Miriam felt puzzled and nervous, but also curious. After the call, she looked at baby Issa, who was sleeping peacefully. His tiny fists were curled as if holding a promise. She kissed his forehead and whispered that maybe this was the start of something real. Outside her window, the city carried on as usual, but for Maryam, life was starting over in a place no one would have expected. The next morning, Ibrahim came personally to pick her up. There were no cameras, no announcements, just Ibrahim, Maryam, Issa, and a quiet drive across town. When they arrived at the freshly cleaned building, Maryam's eyes widened. The walls were painted, new curtains hung in the windows. Flowers decorated the entrance, and a bright wooden sign read Maison D. Lumiere House of Light. She stepped out slowly, holding Issa in her arms. Ibrahim softly told her that the place was hers, not just for herself, but for other women like her. It would be a safe place, a fresh start. Maryam couldn't find the words. Tears filled her eyes as she looked at him. Ibrahim went on, saying that she had trusted him when she had nothing left, and now he trusted her. He asked if she would help others who felt as lost as she once did. Maryam nodded, unable to speak. Then Ibrahim pulled keys from his pocket, placed them gently in her hand, and said, "Welcome home." Overwhelmed by emotion, Maryam fell to her knees. Not from sadness, but from a joy so deep that it seemed to break through every wound she carried. Issa giggled in her arms, and that morning, the sun seemed to rise a little higher over the city. The following day, Ibrahim returned to the shelter, but this time, he wasn't alone. He had invited 5 women, quiet, nervous, and struggling, just as Maryam once had. Maryam stood at the doorway of Maison D. Lumiere, her hands trembling slightly. She knew what she had to do. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and smiled gently, inviting them in. She told them softly that the place was theirs too. The women entered slowly, unsure at first. Some had children with them. One woman's cheek was bruised. Another clutched her baby's bottle like it was a precious treasure. Inside, the house was simple, but full of light. There were clean beds, warm food, and toys for the children. Ibrahim stood back quietly, not wanting things, only hoping that real hope would begin to grow. Later, as Maryam prepared tea for the new mothers, one of them whispered, asking why she was helping them. Maryam smiled through tears and explained that someone had once helped her when she had nothing. That night, the shelter was no longer just a building, it had become a home, and Ibrahim's quiet mission was taking root. But something was coming that would soon test everything they had. Built in just a few days, by the 6th day, news of Ibrahim's actions finally made national headlines. The reports showed images of the president feeding a homeless mother. Some critics questioned whether he was focusing on charity at the wrong time, calling it either a distraction or a publicity stunt during a sensitive political period. Maryam saw the headlines on the small TV in the shelter's lounge. Her chest tightened. Ibrahim had never mentioned what helping her might cost him. Meanwhile, his advisors were furious, worried about the political fallout. https://www.youtube.com. Watch v=y_FOI7 and 18. Ibrahim Traore notices a homeless mother with baby living in a car, and what he does will shock you. One of Ibrahim's advisors had warned him. The man told him that he was getting too involved, and people were starting to question his priorities. But Ibrahim remained calm as he leaned back in his chair. He said firmly that people could question him all they wanted. If showing humanity had now become a political mistake, then maybe politics was what needed fixing. That night, Ibrahim went back to Maison D. Lumiere. When Maryam opened the door, she asked if everything was okay. He nodded and reassured her that sometimes doing the right thing caused noise, but that was how you could tell it was working. Maryam didn't know what to say, so she simply whispered, "Thank you." Deep down, though, she feared what all this might cost him. She wondered if the world would understand what Ibrahim was trying to do, or if they would attack him for choosing kindness over rules. Only time would tell. Later that evening, after putting Issa to bed, Maryam noticed a small envelope inside his crib. This time, it wasn't from Ibrahim, it was from Ika, the youngest of the women at the shelter, just 19 years old. Ika had escaped abuse, carrying her newborn across the towns to reach safety. In her letter, she shared that before coming to the shelter, she had planned to end everything because she thought no one would ever care. But when Miriam had welcomed her, fed her without judgment, and looked at her like she mattered, it was the first time she felt like a mother, not a mistake. She ended the letter by thanking Miriam for saving her life. Miriam pressed the letter to her chest and walked out into the common room. There, she saw the other mothers sitting together, sharing stories and laughter. She looked up and whispered that Ibrahim hadn't just saved her, he had saved them all. But while hope grew inside those walls, trouble was brewing outside. Bigger challenges were on their way, and a twist that no one, not even Ibrahim, could have predicted. On the 7th day, just before sunrise, two black SUVs arrived at Maison de Lumiere. Miriam, still in her robe, peeked out the window, worried. She recognized one of the men. He was a high-ranking official. Two women stepped out behind him, one dressed in a suit and the other carrying a briefcase. They knocked, and Miriam opened the door cautiously. The woman explained politely that they were from the Ministry of Social Affairs and had come to see the shelter for themselves. Inside, the visitors walked around, taking notes, speaking gently to the mothers and smiling at the babies. Then they turned to Miriam and asked who had trained her for this work. Miriam hesitated, then answered honestly, no one had trained her. She simply remembered what it felt like to have nothing and made sure the other women didn't feel that way. The visitors nodded, one of them saying that while Miriam didn't have official training, she had saved lives that weekend that meant more than any certificate. Before leaving, they handed her a sealed envelope. With trembling hands, Miriam opened it and found a letter offering her a job. Just as hope seemed brighter, new troubles appeared. By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had gathered outside the shelter, reporters, critics with banners, and angry voices filled the street. One person shouted, demanding to know why the president was spending his time there when there were national issues that needed attention. Another accused him of putting on a show for the cameras inside. The mothers and children grew frightened. Miriam closed the windows, her heart racing. Minutes later, Ibrahim arrived not with guards or a prepared speech, but alone. The noisy crowd fell silent as he stepped forward. Cameras turned toward him. Ibrahim spoke calmly, saying that if giving shelter to mothers and feeding babies was wrong, then he would proudly be wrong. His voice remained steady as he added that if leadership meant ignoring the most vulnerable, he wanted no part of the kind of leadership. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, one mother came forward. It was Aika, holding her baby on her hip in a clear voice. She said that Ibrahim had saved her and her child. Another mother stepped out, then another. Slowly, people in the crowd lowered their banners. Tears began to replace anger, and the truth became clear. This wasn't politics. This was humanity. Later that evening, a journalist posted a video online. It showed Ibrahim quietly wiping away tears as he listened to the women's stories, real stories of pain, courage, and healing. The video spread quickly, not only across Burkina Faso but throughout Africa and the world. People no longer saw just a politician. They saw a man who listened, a man who gave. Inside the shelter, Miriam sat with Issa in her arms, watching the video alongside the other mothers, feeling the weight and wonder of what had happened. None of the people watching spoke, but tears filled their eyes. Then the phone began to ring, first one call, then another. Local hospitals offered free checkups for the babies. A bakery promised fresh bread every morning. A carpenter reached out and said he would build any furniture they needed at no cost. That night, when Ibrahim returned to Maison de Lumiere, he was humbled. He admitted that he hadn't planned any of this. All he had done was see a mother crying in her car, and he simply couldn't look away. Miriam's eyes glowed as she told him that because he hadn't looked away, now the whole world was looking, but with love. The week wasn't over, but everything had already changed, and yet the biggest surprise was still to come. The next morning, a small envelope arrived at the presidential office. It was handwritten, with no stamp, addressed only to the man who stopped. Ibrahim opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from Miriam. Her words were raw and honest. She wrote about the job she had before the company closed down, about the hunger she and her baby had endured, and about how the world kept passing her by until the night he didn't. She explained that she had given up hope and had thought it was the end, but then he knocked on her window. She wrote that he hadn't given her money. Instead, he had given her something far greater, dignity. He had truly seen her. Ibrahim sat in silence for a long time after reading the letter, tears gathering in his eyes. Then he called his team together. He told them he wanted every minister and every leader to read the letter. He said this was what service should mean. The letter was shared across offices and government screens. It touched hearts, softened views, and for the first time in years, policy meetings began with people's stories instead of numbers. One mother's pain had reminded them of the people they were meant to serve. By the seventh night, the shelter was full, every bed was taken, every room warm. But something even bigger was happening beyond the shelter's walls. A father arrived at the gate, jobless and holding his small child. He had heard of Maison de Lumiere. Then another woman came, then the teenagers. Miriam stood watching, covering her mouth with her hands, and whispered that they were still coming. Ibrahim visited, again, quietly and humbly. This time, he wasn't there as a president. He came as a man, carrying blankets and food in his arms. Standing beside Miriam, he asked softly what they should do next. Miriam, through tears, smiled and said they should build another shelter. Ibrahim nodded and answered that they should build 10. The crowd that had gathered clapped. Some cried, and that night, people who had never trusted a leader before felt something new belief. Not just belief in Ibrahim, but belief in the power of kindness. The following day, the National Assembly passed a new emergency housing plan. All of it was inspired by a mother in a parking lot and the man who stopped to help somewhere in a small corner of the world. A child named Issa would grow up knowing that his life had changed because someone had cared. 1 week, that's all it took. In just 7 days, a nation that once walked past the broken had learned to stop, listen, and help. The story of Ibrahim Traore and Miriam spread across the world. The media called it the miracle in Ouagadougou, but to Ibrahim, it wasn't a miracle. It was simply what should be. Miriam went on to lead the National Shelter Initiative. From living in her car to working in the nation's offices, she became a symbol of hope. Mothers looked to her for strength. Children smiled because of her. One afternoon, Issa took his first steps in the shelter yard. Ibrahim happened to be visiting. When the little boy stumbled into his arms, everyone clapped, and some wiped away tears. Ibrahim laughed and whispered, "Walk strong, little one. You carry the future." As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold, a plaque was placed. On the shelter wall, it read, "Here, one small act of kindness changed everything."